Corps about a year ago, and he's finished his degree, and they want him back as an officer, but he may not go back now because he's married. But I said, we talked to him, and he knows about duty. So we said, I'll just go on here. We didn't know this was the weekend because he'd forgotten to tell us. But thank you so much. You adjusted yourself. We've already had one come forward.
I'm coming up to hug you.
I know it wasn't for baptism because the baptistry broke.
Yeah, the baptistry broke.
The baptistry broke, so they'll be dry cleaning tonight. Those of you who don't know me, your run of luck is now out. I work with churches and I work with medicine, and I do both. And I'm on staff at the Ohio State University and a few other places, so they still fly me back and forth from Colorado to do that sort of thing. As you can tell by listening to me, I spent 10 years in Detroit, and that's where I met Chad and got to know him. I was quite surprised when I saw him here, very pleasantly so, by the way. Very happy to see you here. And it'd be nice to have two people in the same room today that'll say about and out, and that's very nice. We're going to talk about some science here, and here's why. I was raised on the far right of the church. And it was an unpleasant place to be, frankly. My sisters all left the faith. I'm the only boy they had. They all left. One is now timidly circling back around maybe some kind of faith. But that's where she is. One ended up killing herself with a life of crime and drugs. I mean, it got ugly, so it did. And every one of our churches was split repeatedly. And there wasn't any love in it. And so whenever I escaped home, as I did as a 16-year-old, I left home and went across the ocean back to Britain and went to university. I did my best to be an atheist. I wasn't very good at it, frankly. It is depressing. There are no holidays. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. It's kind of sad and pointless putting up a tree to the birth of nobody in particular, and going on. But anyway, it was when I was doing my final work for the first doctorate that I began to realize that I had to do something because science was screaming at me that there was a God. And I can still remember walking into my flat there in southwest Scotland, looking up at the ceiling and saying, "All right," I said out loud, quote, "All right, so you're there, but I don't like you. And I don't know what I'm going to do about it." And so I spent quite a while working on this, and there's so much more to say there, but this isn't really about me. What I want to do is show you some of the bits and pieces that captured my mind as a wannabe atheist and forced me to go directions I didn't want to go. Tonight we're going to take a look at a little bit of the science of it, but there was another side to the equation. All science did was show me that there was a sufficient first cause. There was an intelligence. And I could have very easily have become a deist. If you don't know what a deist is a person who believes in a God-type force, but believes that that force, once it created us, has no further interest in us and has not connected with us in any way. And I was very tempted to go that way, but decided to read the Gospels again and again and again. And I ended up reading them for 18 months. And I really liked Jesus. I didn't care much for religion at that point. Then I began to realize Jesus actually had a religion, so don't get stupid. A lot of people say, "I love Jesus, but not the church." Church is his bride. Don't mess with the bride and tell Jesus you like him. It's probably not safe. But I learned to like Jesus so much that I began to hunt him down. And so that's how I'm here. So tonight we're going to talk the science. Tomorrow, talk about the Jesus side of the equation. Is that fair enough? Now, one of my favorite movies in the world is Kirk Douglas in The Vikings. Now, maybe you've seen it. If you haven't and you're thinking, we've got to rent that, don't. It's actually not a good movie. It's not a bad movie in that there aren't bad words and all that. No, that's not it. It's just poorly acted, poorly written, and completely ahistorical. But I love the movie. And the reason I love it is because of the mistakes in it. As you see the longboats going up the fjord, you see the slaves rowing. Well, Vikings didn't use slaves. But anyway, as they're rowing, the camera zooms in close and you can see that one of them's wearing a watch. I love that. That just makes a movie for me. During one of the fighting scenes, as the camera pans around, you see a jet going across. And another one, you see electric lines going up. And to me, that's what you want to see in a movie. I'm quite happy to see that. What that is an anachronism, something which is out of time. There are things that you will run across if you read your Bible carefully that are out of time and out of place. I want to talk to you about those. Let's set it up. Let's say that you're on a tour in Egypt and you're going to look at Egyptian old stuff. And you happen to have a particularly dull guide. It can happen. And so you're bored, you're not paying much attention, and as you walk, you kind of trip over something, and you see it's a rock, and you just start playing around with it, and it's a pointy rock, and after a while, we're cutting this short, you begin to realize that you have just found the top of a pyramid that's still attached to the rest of it. So everybody else is digging around, and here's a pyramid. Wow, nobody had ever known this was here before. It's not been robbed, it's not been opened. That's incredibly rare. So all the archaeologists come and they open it up and they say, well, you were the one that found it, you get to go in first. And like an idiot, you've never seen any of the movies because the mummies may shuffle, but they always get you because you have to sleep, But anyway, so you climb on in. And you've got your torch, your flashlight, and you're shining around, and there's the mummy, and there's a big sarcophagus thing, and there are the jars with the organs in it, and there's the hieroglyphics, and there's a Buick, and you're going, and you stop, and you see a Buick. Now, this has left you with two options. One, the Egyptians made Buicks, or two, you're not the first person to be in here. When I started reading Scripture, God tested me like he does everybody. If you promised him you're going to read the Bible, Genesis was great. I mean, it's basically sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and chases and things falling out of the sky. It's a lot of fun. And then Exodus is even better because overrun by frogs. You don't get that everywhere. That's good. Liked it. And then you hit Leviticus, and everybody who's ever hit Leviticus realizes that they've hit Leviticus. It's a whole different ball game. And you tend to skim when you hit that one. But that's where I ran into something. And I want to talk to you about what I ran into. I'm not asking you to let Leviticus become your favorite book. It's not my favorite book. But it is the book that really snapped my head around because I found a Buick in the pyramid when I was reading Leviticus. Something out of place. A Viking wearing a watch. You get the point. It's out of place, it's out of time, and I had to have an explanation. There are two general explanations for everything that you see. One, the universe is a box. And everything that is within the box must be explained by everything else that's in the box. Nothing has ever broken the barrier of the box and reached in. Nothing's ever leaked out. Everything in the universe is a closed system. Shake it up and you get a panda. You get planets and such. The other is the universe is a box. But at least once, if not many times, something has reached in from outside the box. We call that something God. I'll put it to you another way. The standard story of evolution goes something like that. And by the way, evolution, you always have to define your terms. People ask me if I believe in evolution. Sure, because if you have a black person marrying a white person, you see their kids are a blend. That's evolution. Evolution, you do it in your garden all the time. You buy certain seeds that were produced to have a certain color of fruit or flower. That's evolution. You see a poodle, God didn't do that. I know him, and he wouldn't have done something like that. But God made dog. We breed dogs. We can breed dogs all the way up and all the way down. We can have Norwegian Mastiffs, and we can have little dust rag dogs that live in purses. But they're still dogs, right? And so evolution, yeah, absolutely. But if you're talking about many kinds from one, unguided, accidental, there's a problem. Because that general story is once upon a time there was nothing. And then it blew up. We already have an issue here. Stephen Hawking in his latest book said what happened was that gravity, there was nothing, but then there was enough nothing that gravity formed and collapsed upon itself and produced something. Well, gravity is something. And everybody that he works with, by the way, has excoriated that book. But you never hear that on the news. Everybody in the physics department, the chemistry department, the biology department are saying, that's rubbish. But you never hear that. And that's sad. Right, they say, once upon a time there was nothing. It blew up. It was very hot. It spun around. On one of the planets, we get some icky bits. It's kind of an ooze. And then we get some wiggle in the ooze. And it begins to form scales and leaps about and frolics in the ooze. And then eventually the scales start falling off. Legs sprout out. It says, I think I'll go for a walk. And it leaps up on the dry bits. And then the hair sprouts everywhere. And it climbs into trees. And then after eating a banana one day, the tail falls off. So it leaves the tree. Shaves and becomes an evolutionist. So basically, the story is from goo to you by way of the zoo, if that helps you encapsulate. Now, there's a whole lot of things you can look at and say, well, this kind of looks like the evidence here. Over here, we say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Prove it. You're in the same situation these people are. They cannot demonstrate anything that they're talking about in a test tube. They weren't there. We have a story that says he was there and that he directed a guy a long time later to write a book about it. Where's your proof? Proof is what we're looking for. And so when we hit Leviticus, we run into a Buick and a pyramid. And the more of those that we run into, the more we have to say, somebody's been messing with the pyramid. Somebody's been in here. What we're going to do tonight is take a look, starting at Leviticus chapter 11, at one of the most boring stretches of Scripture. Now, I work for God. I'm allowed to say it's boring. Peter even said some stuff Paul wrote, it's hard for him to understand. So you're allowed to critique within Scripture. Just to show you the sheer poetry that is Leviticus chapter 11, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a divided hoof and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof, but you must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It's ceremonially unclean for you. The Hyena, and it keeps going. Now, really, all you needed was verses 2 and 3. That gave you the parameters. But no, he's going to go on and give a lot of examples of this. Because he knows what we're like. We like to find exceptions and, well, what about? And he wants us to think about this. So, what's going on here? There are certain categories of food that have been denied to the Israelites. One of the great mysteries of history is how in the world do we still have Jews? Now, don't misunderstand me. There's not an anti-Semitic cell in my body. I absolutely love their story and I love them. But here's the thing. Where are the Jebusites? Where are the Perizzites? Where are the Moabites? Where are the Edomites? Where are the Philistines? There were the sea peoples, which the Phoenicians and Philistines were tied into there. All of them gone. Jews still here. How did they survive? Well, if you read Scripture, you find that God had built in protections for them. There were some that were angelic, but here is a dietary protection for them. In fact, he tells them, he gives them a ton of rules, but then he says, if you do these, then none of those diseases that hit the other ones are going to hit you. We all know some of these rules. We all know that Arabs as well, Muslims and such, as well as Jews, cannot eat pork, right? Right after 9/11, my thought, I figured out how to take Afghanistan without a shot, but nobody wanted to hear me. Just fly over it and bomb it with pegs. Now, work with me. They do need to be live, and so PETA would not be happy. But on the way down, they'd make that bomb noise, all the way down. When you hit, you have pig splatter, the people have to leave. You can't be around pig splatter. When they're all gone, send in our people to clean it up and take it. But no, President Bush would not answer. But I got to meet some nice people who drove SUVs. Why can't they eat pork? Well, we all know why they can't. Trichinosis. Pork, if it's not properly taken care of, and they had no way of properly taking care of it, carries parasites. You eat it, you get the parasites. They had no treatment for it back then. they would die. You're people on the move. You have to deal with what you've got, right? So any animal that tends to carry parasites is actually left out of this. You're not going to be eating those. Oh, but there are more. What about, it talks about a bunny in there, or the rabbit. What's wrong with the bunny? The rabbit is a very lean meat, very high in protein. Why couldn't you eat bunny? Well, there's another group of animals that's ruled out here. Animals that leave parasites behind, shall we say. When a rabbit pees, which is probably the first time that phrase has ever been used and from this stage, but when a rabbit pees, it releases a parasite, a bug. If you are a desert people walking around barefoot, you have cracked feet. You're going to be stepping in this eventually. You'll get a blood disease called tularemia. You will die. By the way, God never explains any of this. Now that one really got to me. And it's not like I know the mind of God. But I think there might have been a reason why he didn't explain it. One is because their science could not have taken it. They didn't have the science to follow it. So why tell them, a story that they can't understand? It's like trying to explain quantum physics to a cricket. You got to prepare the cricket first. You just can't spring that on them. There's another reason, and I think is God wants us to be taught by history. Just do what he tells you. You don't have to know why. I hear people all the time say, why do I have to be baptized? He said to. What else do you need? Why do I have to be faithful to my wife that doesn't love me? Told you to. Probably a reason. And we go back here to look at this. He never explained to them why they couldn't have a barbecue with a bit of rabbit and some pork and wrap it up with shrimp. Let's talk about the shrimp. Because that's another one. Shrimp do not have parasites in their system, and they do not excrete, shall we say, parasites. But there's another set, shrimp are in them, of shellfish or a shark. You couldn't eat shark because it's in the water, but it has no scales. Couldn't eat catfish. Why? Because a catfish and a shrimp are basically little hoovers, little vacuum cleaners. They're the cockroaches of the sea. They eat what nothing else in the sea will touch because it's nasty. They eat it. They store it. Heavy metals, toxins, and in Canada all the time, if you listen to the Canadian Maritime Report, it'll say things such as, we're walling off from here to here, no cold water fish is going to be eaten this month. And the reason is they've detected some rising levels of mercury or lead or something, which is not Canada's fault, but they, bummer about your neighbor. Sometimes the pollution from New England gets into the water. And so what happens? The shellfish eat it. That's their job. Get it out of the environment. And then comes along us, and we pick it up and go, it would be good. Boil this critter, wrap some bacon around it, and eat it. God never explained to them why they couldn't do this. Now, a lot of you may think that you're allergic to shrimp. You may have been told you're allergic to shrimp. And you say, I don't think it, I know it. If I eat shrimp, I blow up and die. Well, this may comfort you. Shrimp have no allergens. What you're reacting to are the poisons they eat. There you go. Now, it's rather like a cat. My wife is highly allergic to cats. And I keep trying to explain to her, cats have no allergens. What they do is they give them a ride. It's the mites on cats that you're allergic to. And every time I say this, people will come up to me later and say, I have a cat and it's the cleanest thing in the world. I used to work in Detroit with homeless people. Some of them lick themselves too. It does not mean you're clean. Cats are a mite factory. There are other places for mites in your home. One of the most common is your pillow and your mattress. On the average, mattress has about 2 billion mites living in it. If you put your ear down there, you can even hear them having a little party. They eat you. They eat the flakes of your skin. It's kind of like taco chips. And so you can hear them. Riba, riba, angale, angale. It's fun. If you have a pillow that is more than a year old, it weighs on average 50% more now than when you bought it. The reason is, the addition is your skin, your hair, your oil, and the bugs that are eating it. So I will see you tomorrow buying pillows. I tend to do this. God took care of all of that here, but there are more. Those are just 3 classifications. There are more classifications here. There are some that don't fit into any of those, and so I would look at those pretty carefully, and I found, wait a minute, this is meat that spoils very, very quickly. And you're people on the move. Or it's a meat that spoils and you're not really sure it did. Every year, we get enough people die in emergency rooms because of church socials or in the Churches of Christ fellowships. What happens is, everybody has mayonnaise based for some reason, it's required. And then they stick it outside where it'll get nice and warm for a few hours while the preacher's really warming up inside. And then you go out and eat it and you die. What happened? Well, it went bad. Well, why couldn't you tell it went bad? Because there's some foods that don't tell you. Not quickly. Some of them will be right on the edge. And I've never really understood this about people. They'll open up a thing of milk and they'll go, is that bad? I don't want to smell it. First of all, my life's, got enough struggles. I don't really sit around thinking, you know what, I'm way too uncomfortable. I need to smell something horrid. Because you'll see people open the mystery Tupperware. Haven't you seen this? And they'll go, oh, poof, off. Smell that. No, I'll just poke myself with a stick if I find myself getting too uncomfortable. If there's a question, is it bad, put it down. Milk is quite expensive nowadays, I'm aware of that, but it's cheaper than a stomach pump. So just put it down. Then, there are foods in there that are like this, and there are also some other foods which are fairly interesting in there. Like camel. Camel threw me. Horses. The horses threw me. Now here's the reason. Horse meat and camel meat, while not really big in America, perfectly healthy. Perfectly good for you. In France, they eat horses and snails, both ends of the speed continuum, right there. And snails, by the way, completely out, and you could not eat snails. So I always thought God's kind of picking on the French there, because most of their favorite foods are out. So why couldn't you eat the horse or the camel? Then it dawned on me, you're people on the move. Neither the camel nor the horse chew the cud. Now, if you don't know what chewing the cud means, it means that you have a segmented stomach. Some people say they have this many stomachs. It's really a segmented stomach. What happens, a cow, for example, you'll see a cow standing in the middle of the field doing nothing, and all of a sudden you'll see it kind of do a little burp, and then it starts chewing. Where'd that come from? Well, they had that in one of the stomachs. That stomach was working on it to a certain point. Now it was kicking it back up for chewing. And when it swallows it, it's probably going to another stomach for some more processing. But because of this, a cow can eat grass and get nutrition. A horse can eat grass, but it needs more. A lot more grass. And it would be really good if you had some oats with a little bit of sorghum and such, because it needs that. A camel needs it too. What happens is this. It would take up so much of the grain supply to feed a horse that you have to actually make some people go hungry, so that later, 10 to 12 years it takes to bring a camel or a horse to the point where it has replicated itself enough that you can kill it and not take a loss. So for 10 or 12 years you're feeding it huge amounts of water and grain so that a few people can eat it, when you needed to be leaving the grain alone so that all people could eat. In other words, that was a social justice issue. God was interested in the poor. And he didn't want the people here to be eating like they eat. America had an interesting little tiff with us. If you remember, a couple hundred years ago, you shot us, we shot you. But the point is, you wanted to get rid of royalty, but you didn't. Your politicians and your Hollywood stars still think they are. And they'll eat dinners that are $10,000 and $20,000 a plate. And I'm looking going, wait a minute, we taxed their breakfast beverage and they shot us. I'm not sure how that works. No, I'm fine with it. We're over it. Anyway, and we love what you've done with our country. And I'm glad you don't have Prince Charles. If you want him, he's available. When I look at him, I can just tell that somebody in the royal family knew somebody in the royal family, if you get my drift. It's as if all of the features in his face hadn't quite learned the benefit of cooperation. God said, I'm not going to have one of those groups. In fact, if you remember, Jesus even said, you will have the Gentiles have people that lord it over them and say, we're doing this for your benefit. And Jesus said, among you it will not be so. And so, I work with elders. I worked with 12 wonderful elders in Detroit area for 10 years. Now I've got 9 elders, and I love those elders out in Colorado. Not one of them tries to lord it over anybody. They know the rules. Anyway, here, these are the rules. Well, that was interesting, but that really wasn't the pyramid thing to me, the Buick in a pyramid. What happens is, let's skip down, shall we? Verse 24. Let's try that one. You will make yourself unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. That, my friend, is a Buick in a pyramid, because it's saying that you can get sick from touching something. And you might say, duh. But that's about 3,400 years too early to know this. Are you aware of the first doctor who suggested that other doctors might want to wash their hands every now and then lost his medical license for it? He didn't. Back then, the reason why doctors wear white coats is because that was what butcher's aprons were. And they wore those because at the end of the day, they looked like butcher's aprons. They would saw off a guy's arm, wipe their hands on this. They'd go deliver a baby, do this, check you for tuberculosis or consumption, and they would do this. And they would never wash their hands. Whenever, in fact, in George Washington's time, it was considered unhealthy to take more than one bath a year. The reason they had those little frilly lace things and they did this is because those were perfumed to smell. Yeah. And little kids in Victorian England were covered in the winter, were covered with goose fat and then sewn into their pajamas. And you'd open them up in the spring. That's why they had the flap. And I wouldn't want to be there when they opened them up. But the idea was that the smell actually kept you healthier. It kept whatever thing out there away. Here we have already God saying, if you touch this, you have to stay outside the camp. Now, it's even better. Because what do you do when you've touched something that might make you sick? You wash. But not just you, your clothes. Now, some of you have watched crime shows. And there are so many of them. They'll do, this crime, Miami, this one, Toledo. There's so many of them. I've never seen, actually, I've never seen one of those shows because I have that thing, a life. But some of you have. And you know that if you even enter a room, you have left some of yourself there and you've taken some of it with you. Now, the reason, by the way, those shows are hated by prosecutors because it's called the CSI effect. Jurors expect to have all of that. Where almost no town has that kind of money and that kind of time. So they don't do it. And so criminals are getting off because they can't do it. Anyway, the point is this. If you touch, let's say there's a deer in the road. And I know there are some states that now say, hey, if you see it, you can eat it. That's because we have medicine in hospitals. That's why. They didn't. If they picked up a deer, what's the rule? Go wash your hands and your clothes. Well, I didn't touch the clothes. You'll see a little kid pick up, here's a dead bird, Mommy. What do? You make them wash their hands and their clothes. You put them in a bathtub. Why? It's on there. But we didn't know that when that was written. We didn't know it for over 3,000 years after that was written. And the first generations that tried to talk about it, until Li Huanwook found them under a microscope and said, wait, there really are things alive that we can't see with the naked eye. First time. God said, if you touch it, you have to wash, and then stay outside until the evening. Now let me explain the way Jewish people speak. When I was a wee boy, my dad taught me Hebrew the same time we learned English. We're people from the Isle of Skye, so we learned a lot of languages coming out so we could communicate. Then I went to West Virginia and they had a completely different language. But anyway, if let's say I picked up that deer and moved it at 3 o'clock this afternoon, so I go out and I wash my hands, I wash my clothes, can I come back in at 7? No. When a Jewish person says until the evening, they mean the next one. You're outside for a minimum of 24 hours. Why? That's long enough if you've got a virus to know if you've got a virus, if there's an issue. And even today, we can't cure viral diseases. Are you aware of that? There's no viral disease we can cure, period. We can inoculate against some. The common cold, the reason it's common is because it's actually caused by nearly 600 rhinoviruses. And if we really could get a vaccination for each of them. So you'd never have another cold, but the shot would kill you. Because it'd be like that big. You don't want one of those. People say, why haven't we cured AIDS? For the same reason we haven't cured any viral disease. We can't. So when you get a cold, what do they tell you to do? Drink fluids, stay away from other people, rest. What is he saying? Get away from other people, fluids, rest. Now that one really got me, but that wasn't even enough. He keeps going. He says it again in the next paragraph, but then we get a cycle of this. All right? Look at verse 32. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article, whatever its use, will be unclean, whether it's made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in water, it'll be unclean until evening, then it will be clean. Now, notice he left something out of here. Metal. Metal could just be washed and used, but the others not. Why? Because these are porous. Every one of these are porous. Some of you think that you have some non-porous containers in your house. We call these Tupperware or things like this. But if you put in tomato sauce, spaghetti sauce, you know what happens, right? It's already making a break for the outside. It stains it. God already knew that some things would actually keep it in and other things would not. So metal was fine, wash it and use it. But all these others, no. And there's even a special category that cannot be washed and reused. Look at this, verse 31. If one of them falls into a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean, and you must break the pot. Oh my goodness. Now, ladies, do not be angry at me. I did not invent history. I'm just merely reporting it. Back at this time, you could get a really good wife for 3 pots. And all of a sudden, just because a lizard happened to run through the kitchen and jump in your pot, you have to break it with no explanation. And now you're like, you know what women are like. If you're a 3-pot wife, you look down on a 2-pot hussy that's down the street. Now you're a 2-pot wife with no explanation from God as to why it had to happen at all. We know. I have a couple friends who are emergency room doctors. If you're not aware of this, most doctors in the emergency room aren't emergency room doctors. They're just on the rotation. That's not good, but that's the way it is. If they're an emergency room doctor, they will talk to you about the certain number every year you get in America. People that show up, and they have most of these, but not all of these. Hair loss, fierce, horrendous headaches, all kinds of intestinal distress from diarrhea to constipation. Some of them are even getting hallucinations or having such mood swings. If it's an emergency room doctor, one of the first questions they'll ask you is, where have you been? Have you been out of the country? Did you buy any pottery? Are you using it? What happened? You go to Mexico and you get some glazed pottery, or Guatemala or Brazil or a lot of places, and it's ornamental, but people say, oh, I'm going to drink my coffee out of that in the morning. Well, it was brought from an unclean area. It was not cleaned clay, and then it wasn't sealed. So every time you're drinking it, you're getting mercury, arsenic, lead, you're getting heavy metal toxins. And by the way, that's permanent. We don't have a shot, metal will be gone. We can't, drag a big magnet over you or something. Once this is done, it's done. And it's terrifying. But people just don't get the message. In this book, it'll even tell you where you're allowed to get your clay for pots. And where it has to be in relationship to where the latrines are. We didn't know that then. Who told them this? This is a real problem if you were like I was and trying not to believe the book. This is a book we can't say, well, they wrote it later on when we knew stuff, because we knew the stuff in the 1600s. And there were already Bibles around by then. So who did this? This is a real interesting thing, but we're not even done yet. Notice that whenever it runs into the pot, you have to throw out everything that's in the pot and break the pot. Why? Because contagion can happen just like this. It only takes one virus, because viruses replicate so quickly. And so everything's got to go, but they're not done yet. Look at verse 34. Any food you're allowed to eat that has come into contact with water from such a pot is unclean. Now, hang on. Here comes a mouse. The mouse runs, hits a spoon. Spoon falls, hits in your cooking pot. Water from that splashes out upon a dress. Now you got to get rid of the dress too. Or you got to wash it until tomorrow. You got to take it out of the camp. A cycle of contagion. That we didn't get until the 1700s. And even then it was not widely accepted until the 1800s. If you remember in your American Civil War, that the doctors did not wash their hands yet. Doing all that field battle surgery, more people died of wounds and medical treatment than of battle. Infection killed more people. That's also true of World War I. For many countries, not all. For many countries, infections and flus killed more people and disease than bullets. That's pretty recent. If we had listened back here, in fact, if we followed Leviticus today, and I'm not suggesting that that's God's law. God now has basically said, Jesus has come, if you want to come see him, have some shrimp, just do whatever you need to, eat some catfish. And if you're like a real idiot, just reach in there and grab the catfish. I saw about 5 minutes of one of those shows, and I said, you know something? That's just wrong on so many levels. Anyway, you go through all of that, just eat a fish God didn't like. If we followed this, for example, in the washing of the hands and the latrines, we wouldn't need flu shots. Now, I take a flu shot. Why? Because the world didn't follow this. Where is your toothbrush? It's probably sitting in a little container looking at the toilet. Hello. Every time you flush, there's a viral mist. So when you go get your pillow, get a new toothbrush. Put it in a drawer. It is not to live where the toilet is. God made it very plain in Leviticus, when you dig the latrine, anything there doesn't get anything that touches your face. We now know that. But how did Moses know that? How did if Moses was helped putting this book together over generations later with redactors, people have said, well, it may not have been Moses. All right, cool. How did anybody know that until the 1800s? And why are most people don't still know it? You can go in and dry your hands on a hand dryer. Don't do that. Where's it getting the air? From the viral-laden air. On average, over 100,000 viruses are blown on your hands per cycle. You will not find those in hospitals. They use towels, paper towels. And you will also find that in hospitals, the handle is on the inside. because that way they can take a towel and get out. I have washed my hands before and gone, oh boy, because the handle's on the other side. So I've just stood there for a while until somebody else comes in. If I'm in a hurry, I'll go ahead and touch it, go on out, and then I'll just hug the next 3 people I meet and go, how you doing? You doing all right? Yeah, good. No, I won't. I want to, but I don't. Point again is, if we followed this, we wouldn't have that issue. I've left a restaurant before because after we ordered our Diet Cokes or whatever we were doing to get ready for the meal, I went to the restroom, saw one of the workers come in and walk out without washing hands. Walked back out and said, we're going. I know Leviticus. I have a doctorate in psychoneuroimmunology. I know immunology's in there. That's one of the words. I know how this works. We don't do this. But there are more here. Purification after childbirth. Let's combine this. Since the kids went away, we can do this. When a lady, and I was at the University of Michigan speaking once, and a whole bunch of ladies were, this is all about God and women, and I was the only Christian they allowed to come speak. So that was fun. And the ladies were saying, now in the Bible, when a woman has a period, she's called unclean and has to separate herself from the community. I said, yeah. I said, no, hang on. Unclean doesn't mean bad. It means to separate. Think about this, people. When you have a highway out, you have a highway in. Right? When that highway is moist, it becomes it's a wick for yeast, for viruses, for other issues. What's the safest thing to do? Get you out of the larger community. So every Hebrew woman, for most of her life, let's say age, they had the onset was later back then, we think. So 13, 14 to somewhere in the 50s or so. Every month got between 3 and 8 days off. No cooking, no cleaning, no child care. Oh, what a horrible punishment. And we know something, we know this happens, by the way, and I've heard lots of theories, but nothing's been proven yet as to why. When you get women together, they synchronize. The women in here know that. You get them into an army barracks or you get them into a school dorm, they synchronize. Which means you're not out there on your own. It's not like there was one woman standing on a rock going, I hate her. No. She's out there with her community, free of all responsibility. That's not a bad thing. And it also increases her chances to stay healthy. And it puts her with a community of people that appreciate and understand her rather than judge her, which is also nice. Well, the chapter 12, purification after childbirth. If you had a boy, you came back into the community a whole lot faster than if you had a girl. You were unclean longer. Why is that? Because it was a very chauvinistic, male-driven world. Every boy knew their place. Every boy had a tribal name and a job and a history. Women did not. Therefore, women were given much more time with their girls to bond. Much more time to teach the little girls, this is your community. These are your people. She was given more time off when she had a girl. You're supposed to circumcise the boy on the 8th day. Why? Well, the Bible doesn't say, but I will tell you something interesting. The circumcision is incredibly valuable for people in their time. Today we have better soaps, we have better baths, we have the like, so yeah, all right, you don't need to do it, it's not God's law. Back in those days, there is no question. We've run the numbers. Things like ovarian cancer, very rare among Jewish women. Why? Cleanliness. Easier to be clean when you're circumcised. And that's why it was done. Why on the 8th day? Again, God didn't say, but it is interesting that the clotting factor in the human being is highest from days 6 to 10. That's the time of, the 8th day is right in the middle. And that's the sweet spot. You are less likely to bleed to death and get infection on the 8th day than any other day of your life. We can go on. There's so much more. There are things, there's a whole chapter about birth, like a port wine stain, birthmarks, moles, skin infections, hair loss, hair changing color and the like. And I have friends that are, actually I only have one right now because one's passed, but I have a friend who's a dermatologist. I don't really know why. To me it'd be a very, that's a rash, that's a rash, that's a rash. Not so, it wouldn't be a great job, but he enjoys it. And I've had him run through this, and he says, well, that's exactly the way we diagnose today, whether something is dangerous, whether it's natural, whether it's contagious, and whether it isn't. And who gave them these rules? Other tribes didn't have these rules. You really need to know that. People will say, the laws of Hammurabi were very close to the Ten Commandments. Yeah, I have got no problem with that. Or that the creation story of the Babylonians and they had a flood story as well, and it's very close to that of the Bible. Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways we could explain that, sure. But when it comes to the cleanliness rules, there was nobody had anything like this. This is unique. Where did it come from? I've only got a few more minutes, but I want to show you something else that really got to me. And that's in the book of Job. Now, Job is a great story. I wish we could talk about it. We don't have that kind of time tonight. And tomorrow we're going to talk about Jesus. So, but I want you to, there's so much in Job. Basically this. Job complains to God, has absolutely right to complain to God. God tells Job, if you know how to run a universe, then criticize me. And he shows him the cosmos, then he shows him animals, and we're going to take a look at the animals just very briefly to make a point, shall we? Job chapter 38, let's say, verse 39. Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in a thicket? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? Let's just stop here. Here's one of the huge problems in godless, unguided, just happened evolution. All right? What did it eat? That's a real problem. I'll explain. I was in a class, London. Teacher said the first creature was an amoeba-like creature, and he drew an amoeba because it's very easy. Just make the ends meet. You got one. They're indeterminate shape. And he said the first creature was an amoeba-like creature, and my hand went up. And I wasn't doing it to challenge him. I was looking for knowledge, just trying to find a good reason not to believe in God. And I said, "What did it eat?" And the whole room went quiet, because amoeba only eat what is alive or used to be. So if it's the first thing that's alive, the history of life on planet Earth is going to last a few minutes. Unless it splits and one of them eats the other. In which case, after billions of years, there'd still just be one amoeba. You have to do the math on this. By the way, science knows that this is a real issue, and I wish I was kidding you, but I'm not. There is now a new theory that once upon a time there was a rock and mineral eating amoeba. There's no evidence except that we have life, and therefore they say it had to have happened. Well, they got to do something, right? So, and again, I'm a huge proponent of science. I'm a scientist. I love science. I get sick, I take a pill. I'm happy about that. Very happy. If I need surgery, science helps me. Science brought me here today in an airplane. So don't be anti-science. That would be really stupid. It really would be. What we have to do is understand that scientists sometimes paint themselves in a corner just like religious people do. And sometimes they got to make up something to get out of it. And this is one of them. Everything eats. Think about this now. For example, the same professor told us that the rabbit, if you take a look at the rabbit, it's poorly designed because way too much effort went into the legs. Right? It's out of proportion. Everything else is kind of cute and then big honking legs, right? That just doesn't fit. And the reason, and by the way, this is not really evolution as taught. It's really Lamarckism, but Lamarck is still being taught under the radar, and people don't realize it. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. If you know what it is, now you know. But it is, they said that the bunnies developed this because only those that could run fast like this and had bigger back legs could outrun the foxes. There's a problem. If you still have bunnies, they were still outrunning the foxes. They don't need to develop bigger back legs. There was a bunny-fox balance. If they developed these to outrun the foxes, we should have more bunnies and eventually no foxes. That's an exaggeration because foxes can eat ground squirrels and such, but you get the point. Why didn't the foxes develop bigger back legs? The same thing with giraffes. They'll say that giraffes, it was only those with long enough necks to reach branches to eat that survived. Okay, that makes sense because you have to be alive to make babies. I got that. But we're talking about big neck. How did this work? We don't have enough time for the genetics to work. We just don't. Everything needs. There is a system in place where not only does everything eat, but there are backups for everything to where if something goes away, we don't collapse. I know people will say, we can't build a house there because there's a snail darter. I get that. I love animals, very much so. But let's be very brutal, shall we? If all giraffes died, let's just pick on giraffes. If all giraffes died tonight, how would that affect your life? The answer is it wouldn't. There are systems built into place in the planet. I'm not anti-giraffe. I don't lay in bed at night going, giraffes. I'm pro-giraffe. Giraffes are not the point here. The point is that even with extinctions, everything eats. Everything eats something. How did that develop? Think about, for example, the barracuda. Barracuda are nasty creatures, but they rely upon other creatures. There's a little fish only about that long called the dentist fish. They swim in schools. We still can't figure out what the signal is, but all of a sudden they just stop swimming, and then they go into a circle, very tight circle. And when they start swimming, after a while, they must be giving out a signal of some kind. We cannot find it, which makes them more technologically advanced than we are, by the way. When they do that, barracuda start showing up. And they get in a line. They wait patiently. One after another swims into the circle, opens up their mouth. The dentist fish eat the stuff off their teeth. Why? Well, that's the only thing the dentist fish eat. And if they don't, the barracuda will lose their teeth faster than they can replace them, and they will die. So here's the question. Which evolved first? You don't have a lot of time. If you're talking a complete mindless accident, you don't have time for this. And there are hundreds of thousands of examples of this. There are bacteria in your gut that you need, and they need you. That's why if you take antibiotics as you call them, antibiotics, learn English, it's a fascinating language. Anyway, if you take antibiotics, after a while you get tummy issues. Why? Because you killed the good guys too. And some of you ladies even have extra issues with UTIs because of it. So now you have to go put back in some. And so you'll have Jamie Lee Curtis on television telling you to eat the yogurt. My advice is eat the yogurt. You know, it doesn't have to be Activia, but you better get in some. The reason is, those are good. They don't live well unless they're in you, and you don't live well unless they're in you, so which evolved first? And how did we get them? All the way through here, you'll see that. You'll see about the wings of the ostrich flapping joyfully. I'm going to have to stop here pretty soon, but I don't debate at all. I don't. But what I do is I have public discussions with atheists that are full of love and laughter and friendliness. As soon as anybody gets nasty, I'm done. Because I used to be nasty, and I don't want to do that anymore. But anyway, he was saying, well, take a look at the ostrich. There's no way that that's intelligently designed. Now, I wasn't trying to tell him intelligent design, but that's what he was going for. So I said, all right, why? He says, well, that's obviously something that was a bird but now isn't, or wasn't a bird but is becoming one. It's in transition. And I said, why do you say that? And he says, well, he has wings, but he can't fly. And I said, you are really making some huge assumptions here. You're assuming that to be a bird you have to fly. But what about penguins? They're birds. They fly in water. And you're also assuming that wings are for flying. He says, what else are they for? I said, I'm glad you asked. Ostriches use their wings in three major ways. One, they stick their head down. They do not bury their head in the sand. No bird buries their head because they're not that dumb. They just put their head down, they stick their rump up, and they fluff up. Why? Because most predators, including lions, cougars, leopards, and the like, don't see well. Are you aware of that? They don't see well. They see in black and white and blurry. One of the most blind animals on a planet is a rhino. He charges wildly at something he thinks might be there. If you stand still and he can't smell you because the wind is in your favor, then he'll never see you. They stick their rump up, they fluff up, they look like a bush. And a lion walks on. Unless the wind changes, then they run. Now, when they run, they can out-corner a lion. Now, that's pretty tough to do, because lions have really great feet with really great cleats in them. God did a great job on the lion. But they can out-corner for a while, and lions don't like to keep chasing, by the way. They like to chase a little bit and be done. If you got to keep chasing, they quit, because they're guys. I'm serious. It's like, I'm going to go back. The missus will bring home something. And how do the ostriches corner? By using their wings like an F1 car does. They turn, using them like ailerons, like rudders, like flaps. And they can turn a lot quicker because of this. The third way they use their wings is that they pull them out a little bit from their body and they vibrate them in a pattern that moves air around to keep the blood temperature low on the hot days. Primitive air conditioning, it works. I said, here's the thing. How did they get even one of these right? How did they get the cornering right? All right, I said one more, but I'm going to give you one more. How about the bombardier beetle? I love that guy. Have you never seen a bombardier beetle? It's like a mega cockroach that's armed. Because when something scary gets close to it, it blows up an explosive, nasty gas. Well, it sounds like a rifle shot, like a 22 going off. And then the thing's not hungry anymore. It runs away. But the thing is, it does this by having in its back two chambers full of things that if they touch each other, they blow up. Now that's got to be tricky to evolve. It really does. Unless you got some help. Now, but here's the thing, it mixes them. Oh no, you're going to blow. No, because it has a third chemical, which is a don't blow up yet chemical. It's an inhibitor. And again, you wonder how they got that formula right. You know, a bunch of them sitting around with white lab coats. Okay, Harry, we're going 4753. You know, oh, okay. No, that didn't work. Anyway, whatever it was. And so now let's say a hyena comes upon them, sticks its nose down, they immediately heat up to over 200 degrees, this gas inside their own body. And then as they're expelling the gas, they add a fourth chemical, which is to get rid of the inhibitor, so it blows up when it leaves. Now, if you'd never heard of a bombardier beetle before, you would have said, I'm making that creature up. But that's the thing, it's not even the most interesting creature. There are alligator snapping turtles that have a tongue that they throw out there to make it look like a worm. There are lanternfish that have bacteria that live in a thing that grows off their head, lights up so that other fish will come near it and then they eat them. Which evolved first? The fish they eat, the lanternfish, or the bacteria that brings the other fish to the lanternfish? After a while, I had to walk into my flat and look up and say, all right, so you're there, but I don't like you. I had to find a way for rapprochement, a way to get back together with God. Because I realized what I would later learn that Alexander Campbell said, and that is, if there is no God, nothing matters. But if there is a God, then nothing else matters. So I had to find a way to track him down. Tomorrow, you're going to see what won me over about Jesus. But right now, I need to be done, because I'm done. And I've flown all over the planet today. And I want to turn it over to my fellow very good English speaker, Chad, to lead us in. And by the way, thank you, Chad, for being here. And thank you for leading us in song. Why don't you go ahead and do that again? Let's do that. I'll move this down.